Good evening, everybody. This is Pastor Sal from the Ridge, and we are January the 29th today in our daily reading, of course, of the Life Journal reading plan, which is the reading plan that we've been doing here at the Ridge, is to read the Bible in 1 year and to read it in 1 year. And so the plan is to read, not just because we want to read the Bible, but we want to be able to understand it as much as we can. So that's what these daily devotionals are. That I'll summarize some of the readings that we have today, because even though it's not a traditional type of daily devotional, it's still devotional because the time that you spend, that we're spending here, kind of summarizing, we're devoting time to Christ, right? So where two or more are gathered in His name, so shall He be. So that's a type of devotional that we're doing. And so we've been covering, we've covered all the book of Genesis. We're in the book of Exodus now. We are in chapter 23. Today's readings will be Exodus chapter 23 and 24. It continues about the law and how the commandments that God is in the covenant that He's making with His people. Then we'll cover Psalm 14. And then we're going to go into Acts 5. So in Exodus 23, it says laws of justice and mercy. And so again, yesterday we were talking about some of the laws that we were doing and that God was giving to Moses, to the people, giving them guidance as to what to do. Today it continues. It says, in reference to the laws of justice and mercy, it says, do not spread false reports, do not help a guilty person by being a malicious witness, right? And it says, do not follow the crowd in doing wrong. When you give testimony in a lawsuit, do not pervert justice by siding with the crowd. And do not show favoritism to a poor person in a lawsuit. So again, it's just, hey, you got to be fair. If you really have something to say, okay, then you can say something, but don't over exaggerate it. Don't make it worse. Don't help the one that's already guilty. In other words, let the facts speak. And of course, it's funny because later on, the Jewish people do this to Jesus, right? By siding with the crowd. So they see a couple of people that are kind of trained to do it, kind of educated in the way of, not taught to say bad things about Jesus, and then the rest of the crowd goes, right? So they go with the crowd. Then it keeps coming. It says, if you come across an enemy's ox or donkey wandering off, be sure to return it. In other words, don't take things that are not yours, even if you find them. If you know that it's someone else's, return them. Do not deny justice to your poor people in their lawsuits. In other words, just because they're poor, don't take advantage of them in the lawsuit. Don't bring any false charges against an innocent person, or honest person. Don't put an honest person to death, for I will not acquit the guilty. Again, so that, this is, again, you do these things, it'll be against God. Do not oppress a foreigner. You yourselves know how it feels to be foreigners, because you were foreigners in Egypt. So again, this is something that can be applied to today's day. Today's day, a lot of people are very much so against immigrants, and whether the law states one thing or the other, this is something that we must remember, that we are not to oppress them, right? We during the time that they're okay, they broke our laws. Okay, so they broke our laws, but just because they broke a law doesn't mean that we're going to treat them badly, or we're going to starve them to death, or we're not going to treat them well. While they're in our care, we are to treat them well. We are not to oppress them, right? Because we were foreigners in the land of Egypt, again, and so we're all immigrants right here in the U.S. Unless you're a Native American or of Native American heritage, then we're all immigrants here in the U.S., period. Those are just facts. Whether you like it or not, that's the truth. So it says Sabbath laws. Then it goes into Sabbath laws, and it starts to talk about the Sabbath day. Again, it talks about how, for 6 years you are to sow the fields and harvest the crops. But during the seventh year, let the land lie unplowed and unused. So this is kind of a way of allowing the ground to reset itself, kind of to get nourishment again. Um, and it goes on to say about that you are not to be careful to do everything I have said to you. Do not invoke the names of other gods. Um, you know, uh, do not invoke the names of the gods. Do not let them be heard on your lips. So, and again, in the middle of it, it says 6 days you do work, but on the seventh day you do not work, so that your ox and your donkey may rest, and so that your slave born in your household and the foreigner living among you may be refreshed. In other words, again, it's a day of rest, right? Everybody replenishes themselves. After the 6th year, on the 7th year, the land needs to refresh itself. In the same way, we need a day that we need to refresh our bodies. And your employees, if you're a business owner, hey, let your employees have a day where they can rest, right? That's what it's saying here. Your ox and your donkey and all these animals, they also need rest as well. And so those are those things that God knows what He's doing, right? And then the 3 annual festivals. So He talks about the annual festivals. For three times a year, you are to celebrate a festival to me. Celebrate the festival on unleavened bread. For 7 days, eat bread made without yeast, as I commanded you. Do this at the appointed time in the month of Aviv. For in that month you came out of Egypt, right? So you commemorate that month they came out. That's when it's done. No one is to appear before me empty-handed, right? So everybody's supposed to come with something. Celebrate the festival of harvest with the first fruits of the crops you sow in your field. Celebrate the festival of ingathering at the end of the year, when you gather in your crops from the field. Again, so it's the festival of unleavened bread to commemorate them coming out of Egypt, the Exodus, right? And then the festival of harvest is the very first fruits of their harvest, right? Right before the very first fruits are supposed to be taken to God, presented to Him. Bring your tithes to the storehouse, remember? And then celebrate the festival of ingathering. So then everybody gathers at the end of the harvest. And you gather at the end of the year when you gather your crops from the field, right? So you continue. So everybody gathers together. So 3 times a year they're supposed to do this. They're supposed to do these festivals. It says 3 times a year all men are to appear before the sovereign Lord. Do not offer the blood of a sacrifice to me along with anything containing yeast, right? Do not offer the blood of a sacrifice to me along with anything that's, they're not supposed to do that. The fat of my festival offerings must not be kept until morning. Again, so just enough that you need for that night. Everything needs to be finished. Bring the best of the first fruits of your soil to the house of the Lord your God. Do not cook a young goat in its mother's milk. Okay, so these are the things that we are to do for the Lord. That God commands. And so it goes on in Exodus, in verse 20, God's angel to prepare the way. So He starts to talk about preparing the way. See, I am sending an angel ahead of you to guard you along the way and to bring you to the place I have prepared. Pay attention to him and listen to what he says. Do not rebel against him. He will not forgive your rebellion, since my name is in him. If you listen carefully to what he says and do all that I say, I will be an enemy to your enemies and will oppose those who oppose you. So again, this is his angel. So the angel of the Lord is going to be going in front. The angel will go ahead of you and bring you into the land of the Amorites, Hittites, Perizzites, Canaanites, Hivites, and Jebusites, and I will wipe them out. Okay, so I guess these people were against God. They didn't accept his teachings. They were not, again, they were against God, and so God was very angry with them, and because they're in the land of milk and honey, so the promised land. So He's going to send an angel going forward. And it says, I will send my terror ahead of you and throw into confusion every nation you encounter. I will make all your enemies turn their backs and run. I will send the hornet ahead of you to drive the Hivites, Canaanites, and Hittites out of your way. But I will not drive them out in a single year. Because the land would become desolate and the wild animals too numerous for you. So little by little I will drive them out before you until you have increased enough to take possession of the land. Again, so God is telling them, I'm going to take you, I'm going to go ahead of you. He's going to plan everything, He's going to prepare everything for them. And we see this later. We're going to see this when we get into once Joshua starts to take them into the land, the promised land. And when the battle at Jericho is really a true example of what God is talking about here. And then it says, I will establish your borders from the Red Sea to the Mediterranean Sea, and from the desert to the Euphrates River. I will give into your hands the people who live in these lands, and you will drive them out before you. Do not make a covenant with them or with their gods. Do not let them live in your land, or they will cause you to sin against me, because the worship of their gods will certainly be a snare to you. So he knows already that how we are as humans, and so they're going to make their gods look so powerful. They're going to make these images of them, and of course they're not supposed to make any images, right? We're not supposed to worship any images whatsoever. That has not changed, folks. That has not changed. Even with Jesus coming, the symbol of the cross is a symbol for us as Christians, but it is, we are not to we don't worship the cross. We worship God. Okay, so that's the thing. Yeah, it's just a symbol, a remembrance of what the cross stands for, but not we don't worship the cross, right? So anyway, so it says that the covenant confirmed, and so now he starts to talk about the covenant that the Lord God was making with Moses and his people, and it says, the Lord said to Moses, come up to the Lord, you and Aaron and Nadab and Abihu, and 70 of the elders are to worship at a distance, right? They're going to be worshiping. They're going to come up on Mount Sinai, but they're only going to worship at a distance. But only Moses alone will approach the Lord, right? So then he's up there, and the Lord calls him. This is where he starts to write everything on these tablets, the commandments. Then, he sent some young Israelite men, and they offered burnt offerings and sacrificed young bulls as fellowship offerings to the Lord, right? Moses took half of the blood and put it in bowls, and the other half he splashed against the altar, right? So again, he's doing this covenant with the blood. Then he took the book of the covenant and read it to the people, right? So everything that he wrote down, then he started to read it to the people. And he says, we will do everything the Lord has said, and we will obey. The people say. And then Moses then took the blood, sprinkled it on the people, and said, this is the blood of the covenant that the Lord has made with you in accordance with these words. Okay, so here's that covenant. Now, we see it later when Jesus takes the cup and it says, this is the blood of the new covenant, right? This is why, if you ever wonder, well, what do you mean new covenant? Well, what covenant was there before already? Right, so this is the new covenant here. This is the covenant, he did a covenant with Abraham. And because of that, these are the people of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Because of that, he does another covenant with them here. He establishes them because these are the people, the descendants of Abraham, right? Descendants of Jacob, Israel, as his name was, as we know before, that we saw that Jacob's name was now turned to Israel. Then the Lord said to Moses, come up to me on the mountain and stay here, and I will give you the tablets of stone with the law and commandments I have written for their instruction. Okay, so this is where he starts to write these tablets. And then Moses set out to Joshua his aide, and Moses went up on the mountain of God. And it says, he said to the elders, wait here for us until we come back. Aaron and Hur are with you, and anyone involved in a dispute can go to them. So Joshua goes with Moses. And then Moses went up on the mountain, and the cloud covered it. And the glory of the Lord settled on the Mount Sinai for 6 days. The cloud covered the mountain, and on the seventh day the Lord called to Moses from within the cloud. To the Israelites, the glory of the Lord looked like a consuming fire on the top of the mountain, right? So this fire that just keeps burning and burning, but doesn't burn the mountain down. It looks like a furnace, right? And Moses entered the cloud as he went on up the mountain, and he stayed on the mountain 40 days and 40 nights. And there's where it leaves off. Um, Tomorrow we're gonna, if you read tomorrow, that you'll see what's gonna happen tomorrow. And then Psalm 14, it's a psalm for the director of music of David. So then he writes this psalm. He says, "The fool says in his heart, there is no God. They are corrupt. Their deeds are vile. There is no one who does good. The Lord looks down from heaven on all mankind to see if there are any who understand, any who seek God. All have turned away. All have become corrupt. There is no one who does good, not even one." So David is talking about how he probably sees this happening. Why are people turning away from God? Nobody's doing right. Do all these evildoers know nothing? He's like, man, don't these people know? He's kind of frustrated with humanity at this point. Or maybe his kingdom, because they do these things. They devour my people as though eating bread, right? The evildoers. They never call on the Lord, but there they are, overwhelmed with dread. For God is present in the company of the righteous. You evildoers frustrate the plans of the poor, but the Lord is their refuge. Right? The Lord is our refuge, right? They're our refuge. Oh, that salvation for Israel would come out of Zion. Zion, of course, is considered the daughter, right? Which means Jerusalem. And he says, when the Lord restores his people, let Jacob rejoice and Israel be glad. So again, it's when God does a salvation, let it rejoice. Let us rejoice. We must rejoice. It's just a beautiful song. How David talks about how all these people that do evil, which is all of us. We all, every time we sin, it's an evil. Period. And I hate to speak in periods and all this kind of stuff, but that's what it is. Sin is sin. There is no, in the wages of sin is death. Period. So, anytime we sin, we are an evildoer. And that's what he's saying. Everybody's sinning. What's going on? People are not focusing on God, and so it's just a wonderful song. And then now we talk about in Acts 5. We're starting to get into the names of some of the people of the early church, and so in the beginning of the first parts, it talks about Ananias and his wife Sapphira. This is an interesting story. I'm not exactly sure, why God would do this, other than maybe to show an example to people that, hey, you can't lie to God, and I think this is what it's about. And the story is that Ananias and her wife and his wife sell a piece of land, property that they had, and then they come. And what he does is that with his wife knowing, and Ananias, what people were doing at this time as a community of God in the church is that they would go sell their properties. Their lives were changed. They were transformed by the Holy Spirit and by Jesus Christ, by becoming believers. They completely grabbed the concept of sell what you have and give to the poor, and so they sold all their findings. They gave it to the community, to the apostles. The apostles made sure that all the needy people had something, and so these guys were going to do the same. But they were a little greedy, so instead of giving it all, what did they do? They kept some of it. And Peter knew this, right? How did Peter know this? Because it was a revelation from God to him. He knew. And maybe what it was also is he probably knew because, okay, if people were selling their property, if several people were doing this and they were putting before the apostles the money, so of course the apostles knew, hey, okay, if they sold, I knew if they owned this much land or these many possessions, this is the amount of money that they're bringing. Okay, more or less, they weren't dumb. They knew more or less what things costed. And so if they come and they sell a piece of land and they only bring so much money, it's going to seem off. And so they're going to be like, man, and to some people will say, well, wait a minute, ain't that a little greedy of the church? A little greedy, and no, in this time it wasn't, because they were all moved to bring everything, right? They brought their stuff so that as a community of the church, they made sure that everybody was taken care of, because they were being taken care of too. But these guys got greedy, and they thought, well, we'll keep some of it to us, and we'll only turn in some, and we'll say that it only sold for that. So the husband goes, Ananias, and he presents this to the apostles, and then Peter says, wait a minute, you wicked man, why are you doing this? You haven't robbed only us, you robbed God. And so when Ananias heard this, he fell down and died. He probably was like, I didn't tell anybody, only my wife knows. How does he know? And, he must have just been fell of fear, had a heart attack of, oh my God, God talked to him, or God knows, and maybe heartbroken because he knew what he did against God. And so he dies. And then a great fear seized all of that, heard about what happened, and some of the people came and they went to go bury him. Just 3 hours after, the wife comes in, not knowing what had happened. And then Peter asked her, tell me, is this the price you and Ananias got for the land? In other words, hey, is this really as much, all that you guys got for the land? And she says, yes. She said, that is the price. So Peter said to her, how could you conspire to test the Spirit of the Lord? Listen, the feet of the men who buried your husband are at the door, and they will carry you out also. At that moment, she fell down at his feet and died. So again, I think the purpose of this, is it's not to say that we are to fear God like that. God's not going to strike us dead every time that we do something wrong. Otherwise, we would have been gone a long time ago, right? We would have been gone since we were 2 years old. It's not the case. The case is this: it's to prove that the wages of sin is death. Now they did these, and that's what Jesus said, that the wages of sin is death. At this moment, they do these things. They conspire to lie to God and to the church. And so what happens? They are that example. The wages of sin is death. This is an example of showing, hey, you lie to God, this is what's going to happen to you. You may not die in the same way that they did, right? But your soul is going to be dead. And by doing these things, if you constantly lie to the Lord, or keep things from the Lord, or do things against the Lord, it's going to catch up with you. It's going to catch up. So I think that was the example more so, and not necessarily that God is so mean that, oh gosh, what do you mean? Why would God do something like that? No, it was to prove a point. And so very rightfully so. And so then the apostles heal many. And so, then they start to talk about how they start to go into, they would hang out at Solomon's colonnade. And so all the people start to see, they don't want to mingle with them, but at the same time they have this respect for them. And then, but they, little by little, more people start to listen, and they start to grow in numbers. And then people would bring their lame, or people that were sick, and I mean, everybody knew about Peter so much that they would even put the people lying down just to see if they would catch his shadow, it says. Crowds gathered also from the towns around Jerusalem, bringing their sick and those tormented by impure spirits, and all of them were healed. So miracles were being done, signs were being done. The apostles again are persecuted once again. The Sadducees are mad because they're continuing to do this. And then, of course, they say, go stand in the temple courts, he said, to tell the people all about this new life. And so they're gathering and they're telling all the people, at daybreak they entered the temple courts, and they had been told, and as they had been told, and then they began to preach. And so now they're in the temple. Right? They're not in just Solomon's colonnades, but they're told, hey, go in the temple. And so they're there. And when the high priest and associates arrived, they called together the Sanhedrin and the full assembly of the elders, and they sent to jail the apostles. Again, they arrest them. But guess what? The angel of the Lord appears before them and just has them walk out. Just walk out. The guards don't even know. Nothing happens. They just walk out. Then someone came and said, look, the men that you put in jail are standing in the temple. So they walk out and they start preaching again in the temple. And, the Sanhedrin go and they're starting, they're going to go visit the prisoners, but they're not there. The doors are locked. The guards are there, but they're not there. And then someone comes and says, look what they are. Look. At that point, the captain and the officers brought the apostles, and they did not use force because, of course, There's too much of a crowd that's in their favor, and they're afraid that they're going to get stoned. And again, pop, pop, chickens, right? But then the apostles were brought in and made to appear before the Sanhedrin and questioned by the high priest again. And of course, and they're telling them, hey, we told you not to be preaching in this name, and yet you have filled Jerusalem with your teaching and determined to make us guilty of this man's blood. So this is what they're really mad about. It's like, wait a minute, you're telling people that we're responsible for this death. And of course they keep saying, now they proclaim it again. They say, look, you're the ones that killed him, but by the Holy Spirit he was raised from the dead. And he says, who are we? We are to obey him, right? And these things that we have heard and seen. So they're so mad that they want to kill them. But there's a Pharisee named Gamaliel, and so he was a teacher. We're going to find out later that he is Paul's teacher or Saul's teacher. But a very wise man, and he says this: look, hey man, be very careful about what you're going to do with these men. Now remember, a time ago, there was Theodas appeared and claiming to be somebody. He had like 400 men that rallied against him. Of course he was killed, and then all his followers were scattered, and then nothing came of it, right? And then he says, then Judas came during the census, same thing, he rallied people, we took him in, we killed him, he was killed, and then all of their followers were spread out. So what he's basically saying is, look, we've already killed Jesus, just in the same way they killed Theodas and Judas, another Judas, not the one that betrayed God. So he says, all those were killed, their followers were scattered, and nothing happened to this. So he's saying, look, if we let them go, just let them go, and they're going to scatter. If it's of this world, in other words, if it's something from this world, nothing was going to come of it. However, if what they're doing is in the name of God, then you're not going to be able to stop them. There's nothing you can do, and they're going to be able to stop them. And so they're thinking it's just the same way as the other ones. Look at, remember, these people. There's many of these people are going to come and say there's somebody. Just get rid of them. We've already got rid of Jesus. So hey, let them scatter. This is the key. This is the key, because they do scatter and the church grows. Right? We're going to find out later. So day after day in the temple courts, from house to house, they never stopped teaching and proclaiming the good news of Jesus is the Messiah. So that is an invitation to us today to continue to do it. No matter who stops you, no matter whether Facebook tells you that you can't be putting scriptures and you can't proclaim the word and you can't share your faith on Facebook or Twitter or YouTube, even here or anywhere else. You know what? You proclaim the word, period. You be a bold witness, no matter what society says. Society is not right. The Lord our God and the Bible is right. And with that, I say good night, and we'll see you all tomorrow.